Once again, we walked over to the windows, hoping to see a miracle. The North Tower, the one with the antenna on it, was just completely burning, and we worried it might collapse too, and then it did. It was gone in seconds. And all we could think about is how many more people just died. We were literally numb to what we were witnessing. Two of the largest skyscrapers in the world are now completely gone. Dust, smoke, and papers, that's all that was left. The silence at the office was deafening. No phones were ringing, people were speechless, and were in shock. I can only imagine the destruction in and around those buildings. It had to be horrendous. No one knew where to go or what to do. And suddenly we heard that some of the trains were starting to run again. We thought, we can't just stand around and do nothing. Let's go and try to do something. I decided to try to get to my brother's firehouse in Lower Manhattan. A co-worker and I boarded the subway train. The train was crowded yet eerily quiet. People's expressions said everything. Moments later, the train pulled into Chambers Street Station, which is only 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. The subway doors opened, but no one got on or off. We looked out to the subway platform. There was dust and soot that covered the benches, the platform, and everything. The train pulled out from the station and suddenly came to an abrupt stop. People gasped and screamed. New York City subways always stop this way, but on this day, with people's nerves on edge, everyone reacted to it. We had looks of fear and disbelief. This had become the common expression of the day. 5 minutes later, I got off the subway and started walking to my brother's firehouse, which is ladder 3 on the east side of Manhattan. Smoke, ash, and sirens filled the air. There was no pedestrian traffic, just emergency vehicles. Out of nowhere, I heard a low-flying plane. People walking in the street ran for cover, and I moved up against the building. It flew right over our heads and disappeared. It scared the hell out of us. It was like a scene out of the Twilight Zone. I started walking again and got within a few blocks of my brother's firehouse. I could see many fire trucks and firemen, and I had a little bit of hope. I thought maybe John is there and he's okay. I started to run, and I got there and I started searching the faces for John or any firemen I might see. But I didn't recognize any of them. Looking at them, they just didn't look right. Even these big, brave, courageous New York City firemen were scared and nervous. They knew many of their fellow comrades, brothers as they called them, were inside the towers when they collapsed. I see a fireman I know who used to work with my brother, and he's covered in ash. He had just come back from the towers. I look in his eyes and I ask him if there's any chance for survivors. Do you know if my brother was down there? And he didn't know what to say. I said, Billy, tell me. And he said, Mike, I wish I had better news, but the place is unlike anything any of us have ever seen, and we're not finding survivors. All 12 guys who were here this morning in his firehouse, and he couldn't say it. He said, we think they're gone. As I'm standing in front of the firehouse, the phone inside just kept ringing, and a fireman standing next to me said, I'm not answering anymore. Family members and friends were calling, knowing their husbands, sons, brothers, and fathers were working that morning. They wanted to know if they were okay, and he couldn't keep answering the phone and lying to them. He took me upstairs to my brother's locker, and I opened it and looked inside. There was his wallet, his pictures, his clothes, his personal belongings, and it smelled like my brother John. It was early afternoon, but at that time we both knew John wasn't coming back. I just knew he was gone. I decided to maybe try the nearest hospitals, and I took a walk to St. Vincent's. When I arrived at the hospital, staffers were handing out lists of the injured. I scanned the lists over and over again, trying to will Jimmy Ladley or John McAvoy onto this list. I would see a John or a Jim, but they didn't have the right last name, not the one I was looking for. Doctors and nurses were waiting outside the hospital with gurneys for injured patients, but none were coming. I met someone else who was looking for his brother, who worked for the same firm my buddy Jimmy did, Cantor Fitzgerald. We exchanged numbers and said, if we hear any survivors from Cantor Fitzgerald, we call each other. We never made that call. Those lists never had the right names on them. My cell phone rang, and it was my friend Mike. He lived 3 minutes from the trade centers and about 2 minutes from St. Vincent's Hospital. We were out together the night before. I'd spent the previous night in his downtown apartment. I'd walked the streets for 3 or 4 hours and visited 3 or 4 hospitals with no luck. At this point, I was mentally and physically wiped out. I walked a few blocks to his apartment. The whole time I'm thinking, what I just witnessed can't be happening. Oh, my brother and best friend dead? It can't be so. Mike buzzed me into his apartment. When I opened the door, he and his girlfriend were hugging each other, almost as one sitting on the couch. He had walked home from his downtown job, and he too had dust all over him. Everyone I met that day had the same look of fright and disbelief. We didn't know what to say to each other. I sat down on the bed next to him, and I told him that both John and Jimmy were missing, and I had a bad feeling about it. He was trying to be positive and supportive. That's his nature. But he too knew that this was a bad day. I buried my head in my hands, and for the first time the realization hit me, and I let it out and I started to cry. I looked at Mike and said words I never thought I would ever say. I said, Mike, I think my brother John and my best friend Jimmy are dead. He had no response. And I know now I'll have to go to my mother's house and tell her what I know. But how do I do that? How do I look at my mom and tell her her hero son is gone? How is she going to react? I thought of my sister-in-law, my niece and nephew who were 15 and 11. I thought of Jimmy's wife. They were so in love and they had 2 small children. I was distraught yet trying to hold it together. By nightfall, after spending a few more hours between hospitals and my brother's firehouse, my oldest brother and I decided to go to my mom's. We spent 3 days there watching TV and listening to the radio, hoping for a phone call that told us John and Jimmy were found alive. Those calls never came. As fate would have it, those gut feelings they had on 9/11 became reality. Both John and Jimmy perished on 9/11 inside the trade centers. It would take months for their remains to be recovered. We later found out that my brother John was in the firehouse in street clothes and off duty when the first plane hit. He and other firemen put on their gear, hailed the cab, and took the cab to the trade center. He was and still is a true hero. My brother John was a loving husband, brother, friend, son, and father. He was courageous and fearless. He was a tough guy. He was my guardian angel. He was my best man when I got married in 1981 and godfather to my son born in 1985. My friend Jimmy was the best friend any guy could have. He was someone you always asked for advice about life because he always had the right answer. He was the best man when I got married in 1998. He was to be the godfather of my daughter born in October 2001. He, my brother, and thousands more were murdered on 9/11, but they must never be forgotten. I certainly never forget them for what I witnessed on 9/11, and I hope America doesn't either. 9/11 was one of our truly darkest days, but yet it was one of our brightest. Ordinary citizens became heroes. Rescue workers saved over 25,000 lives, the largest rescue in our history. We were united against terrorism as a nation. Many young men and women volunteered to join the armed services to protect us against terrorism and take the fight to the enemy. Some have died. Many have watched their fellow soldiers die and still fight on. Their courage, dedication, and sacrifice must never be forgotten. On 9/11, the bravest and finest of New York City gave their lives so other people could live. Ordinary citizens aboard Flight 93 fought to save lives on the ground and prevented another attack. And still today, our servicemen and women and their families sacrifice for us. Their heroism is a true testament of our American spirit. We must remember the sacrifice all gave and can still give for our freedom each and every day. I share this podium with people who know what that sacrifice means. We must always thank our veterans, our police and firemen, not only today, but every day, because freedom isn't free. May God bless them all, and may God bless America.